terms of the consequences of Brexit. Now, before we actually get into our debate, if there's anybody here that really came for a United Reformed meeting, you're in the wrong room. And you should be there. So the pastor came in earlier and said, please be very gentle with somebody that looks unfamiliar and doesn't really seem to want to be with you. And so if anybody does wander in, looks a bit confused, they have to be in the other room. But the format for this evening is going to be that our four distinguished panelists are each going to give us, from their own perspective, their own political, academic and business experience perspective, an idea of what Brexit and the consequences of Brexit are going to be for them. After that, we're going to have a debate. And so it would be very good if we follow something like the format of question time, so that you think, as they're speaking, about the kind of questions that you would like them to answer. Now, it may well be that some of the panellists don't want to bat with the ball that you throw, but I'm sure that somebody will, and that will enlighten our knowledge. And so tonight, as you can see, we have a new format for this Fabian's meeting. We have four distinguished guests, Dr. Anna Syngellakis, who was appointed Principal Lecturer in European Studies at the University of Portsmouth in 1990 under the Jean Monnet Initiative of the European Commission. Her teaching interests are focused on the evolution, institutions, policies and law of the European Union. Her research interests are international and European community, environmental law and policy. And then we have Professor Traute Meyer, who is Chair of Social Policy within the Social Sciences, Sociology, Social Policy and Criminology units of the University of Southampton. After receiving a Diploma in Political Science from the Free University of Berlin, she undertook a PhD studentship at the Research Unit Labour Market Policy and Employment of the Social Science Research Centre in Berlin. In 1995, she was awarded a PhD from the Department of Political Science at the Free University of Berlin, where she taught as lecturer between 1994 and 1999. Most of us who come to Fabian's are very familiar with one of our distinguished members, Councillor Sarah Bogle, who represents Bargate Ward, which is, as we know, a challenging, diverse and ever-changing part of Southampton. She has served on several influential bodies, including the Children's Trust, Corporate Parenting, and the Southampton Children and Young People Trust Partnership Board. Her policy interests include transport, city centre regeneration, and economic development. Sarah has many years' experience in various operational and project management roles in industry and more recently in the public sector, and has experience dealing with EU and international trade. And then we make no apologies for the fact that we are overwhelmingly able to hear these three distinguished ladies, and we don't apologise to Darren that you're the only man on the panel, so you're going to have to hold your own territory there on some of these issues, but we're very happy to have tonight Dr. Darren Caffey, who holds a PhD in Spanish sociolinguistics from the University of Southampton. Darren lived in San Diego, Chile, where he taught English and researched bilingual education policy. His current teaching and research responsibilities as lecturer in Spanish and linguistics includes employability for modern language graduates. Outside the university, Dr. Caffey serves on the executive committee of the Association for the Study of Spanish in Society and was organiser of the International Sociolinguistic Symposium. He is currently Councillor for Bargate Ward. So, our panel. Dr. Caffey, Last but not least, perhaps you could introduce your perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I come at this with a couple of hats on. One of them is my work as a university lecturer in modern languages, an inherently internationalist environment, a multilingual environment. So you can imagine what the majority of my colleagues thought of Brexit. Perhaps one of the first consequences of that is that if as a department we could fill a swear box, we could probably pay off the 50 billion that it's going to take to remove us from the European Union. But I also come at it from my cabinet role as well, which is as cabinet member for education and skills, and particularly the skills agenda in terms of the investment that various European funding bodies have made to our city, and now has thrown into so much uncertainty what we will do, and I'll outline a few of those in a moment. But I think in terms of the university perspective, there are various consequences for students, for the Erasmus scheme, the mobility scheme, which has seen over 200,000 students go on exchange placements to Europe over the years. In terms of employability, there's a huge impact as well. For staff, many of my colleagues, and not just because it's a modern languages department, but if you took a straw poll across any part of the university, we have a very, very mixed, very European, very international staff body, many of whom now, again, have been reassured by the Vice-Chancellor and others, but that reassurance only extends to 2 years' time. Beyond that, there is a lot of uncertainty which could result in a tremendous brain drain from the UK's universities, and so that's something that's worrying us too. And I'll also touch on the kind of research aspects, because again a lot of research funding has come from the European Union. So I'm in a department where already we are, as a result of the British education system, quite apart from our role in Europe, has seen a diminishing number of students taking modern languages over the years. Partly that's to do with the results game. The head teachers will make decisions, quite understandably, on where not only there is some diversity of the curriculum, but also where there are results and where they're going to be able to get that take-up of subjects and therefore pay for the teachers to teach them. On the whole, modern languages has been going down. Now, dare I say it, part of that is my own government's fault, and that we stopped modern languages being compulsory at GCSE a few years ago. I never really took a proper holistic approach to that, but that's going on all the time already, and so modern languages at universities across the UK fell at around 16% between 2007 and 2014. So in a sense, I fear for my own job, because if in a few years' time there is not the take-up of A-level students coming through, then there will not be that demand for languages lecturers in quite the same way. And it's very short-sighted, because of the opportunities that are available to those with languages. Now, that doesn't just mean those taking a single honours language degree, but those taking business and a language, maths and a language, engineering and a language. We have a very fruitful relationship with those who go to Germany and work for Rolls-Royce in some of their engineering projects. So there's lots of ways in which languages are an addition and add to the employability of students. 2/3 of businesses say they need employees with language skills. That is at risk. Again, in a way, apart from Brexit, but unless we reverse that decline, certainly we're going to need multilingual negotiators for the 40,000 pieces of legislation that are going to have to be renegotiated. Quite how we can do that in the expectation that everyone speaks English is, if not true, supremely arrogant. Only 6% of the world speaks English as a first language, so let's keep that in perspective. A big risk and a big question that many parents have as they come to Southampton with their children, thinking about Southampton as a place for them to come and study, is what opportunities are there going to be after they graduate? And much of that is bound up in the opportunities that are there for them throughout their degrees. Obviously, as a language degree, there is a compulsory year abroad. For example, this year, of 165 modern languages students that we have, 119 are going on the Erasmus placement scheme to Europe. That's nearly 3/4 of them. Now that, we have been told, is safe up until 2020, but what then? there is so much uncertainty around this. Back pre-23rd of June, when we kept hearing about, you don't need to be part of the European Union to be part of the single market. Look at Norway, for example. Well, it doesn't even look like we're going to be part of the single market anymore, and yet Norway is one of those that has access to the Erasmus scheme within their model of being part of the European Union. Switzerland too. Will we have that access? No one can say at the moment. The impact on social mobility, on graduate employability, you can go with these skills and say you've been part of such a prestigious exchange scheme as Erasmus, then that inevitably helps. But as I've said, that a lot of the Erasmus funding makes opportunities for our students possible. And the risk is that if it becomes ever more expensive, if that funding is removed, if you have to pay the full price of going on a year abroad or a year's placement to Europe, then modern languages will become a subject for the elite, and it shouldn't be that. There are skilled modern linguists who come from very modest, poor backgrounds. And so if we make that something where only those who come from particular types of schools will study it, and only those with the funding behind them to go on these exchange placements will be able to, then I severely regret what that will do to social mobility. I'll touch on staff. I'm presuming you'll give me a shout when my 5 minutes or so is up.
Take another 3.
Okay, that's fine. I will ski through the notes. So in terms of staff, we will see almost inevitably barriers to recruiting talented European staff, and that has already happened. Those who would move to the UK would bring their expertise to many of our departments, not just modern languages, but the sciences, the other humanities, health, and so on. They will think twice about that when there is only when there is a clock ticking already on the security that they can look for. And within academic staff across the country, 17% are from the European Union. So that's 1 in 5 of my colleagues may or may not be there within a couple of years, and that will be, as I've said, a huge brain drain if we begin to lose their expertise. In terms of research, already, again, we talk about what the consequences will be. Many of the consequences, intended or unintended, have already started happening. And one of those things is that a huge, lots of different pots of money that the European Union has funded some fantastic research, life-changing research in many cases, within our universities, will simply either start drying up in a couple of years' time, or already again, because of the uncertainty. And this is the biggest killer, I think, of a lot of opportunities, is the uncertainty that we're seeing in the university sector. That will mean that those looking for previously collaborative projects involving lots of different partners across lots of different European countries will start excluding the UK from that, because again, there was no guarantee that will help them to get the funding. Again, missing out on a lot of the expertise that is here. I took part in a project called LINE, that was Languages in the Network of European Excellence. It looked at, there were 80 of us across 9 European countries working on lots of different topics around the multilingualism that we see in our classrooms. If anything is relevant to Southampton, it's a project that takes that in and shows that there are untapped resources there. There were some wonderful findings from it that, again, I don't think we will see similar projects happening in future unless this government and its negotiators, whoever they are and whether they've got enough of them yet, really pull their socks up and deliver the best for Britain. But my view will simply always be that we had the best opportunities within the European Union, and I fear that lots of this uncertainty will kill off opportunities for students. It will kill off, and I don't think what did they call it, Operation Fear or Project Fear or scaremongering or whatever. It's happening already, and so actually it's been seen to be Project Reality, and I fear that colleagues will go opportunities for society-changing research that will help a lot of us not just in academia, but in local government as well. And just in finishing, I'll mention a couple of areas where previously the City Council has received investment from the European Social Fund and others to support, for example, redundancy funding, and helped more than 700 of the former Ford employees and the supply chain on closure of the plant. Where will that funding come from in future? I don't think the government has got much more money up its sleeve unless it's for a pet project. The Solent Jobs programme that helped 1,200 long-term unemployed people with health conditions was partly European Union funded. And so the problem is, to what extent will the government replace funding that we have seen come in and we have seen the benefit of in our communities? Many communities who said at Brexit or on the European Union vote that they didn't see the benefit of being part of the EU. There very much were those benefits. I fear we didn't sell them enough, and I fear we will live to regret that as we see the consequences come through.
Thank you. Now, with all of the speakers, there is such a wealth of knowledge that you'll understand that this introduction is just the tip of the iceberg. They've all come along very heavily laden with notes and with bullet points and with ideas that they will want to share, which will come out in the debate. So don't think that even that great introduction that Darren has given is all that he has to say. I know that he has a lot more, and so that will be part of our debate going forward. So hold on to that. As the Archbishop of Canterbury says, what you see you hold, and what you hold you keep. So perhaps next we could have Traute.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yes,
right.
Professor Meyer.
I thank you very much for this invitation. And I, of course, I mean, being a German myself, you know, it's like everyone will know what side I'm on in the Brexit debate, and that makes me puts an onus on me to be as balanced as I can be, because I know that in this city, 52% of the citizens of Southampton voted to leave. So I feel we all have to make an effort to understand what is going on. Anyway, my personal background is the welfare state, social rights. And I have recently also looked at migration, and I'm a migrant myself, so I can talk about this in sort of personal experience. But I want to say a little bit now about the situation of European migrants, EU migrants in the UK, and how Brexit affects them and what their relationship with the welfare state has been. Because, as you all know, in the debate, migration has been one of the big issues, one of the key reasons, arguably, why the majority of British citizens decided to leave, and the welfare state and views and so on loomed large in the debate in the run-up to Brexit and in the years before. So I want to just start by saying, what's the migration? What's the issue of migrants in the UK in terms of sheer numbers? And here, if we look back to the this long time back, but I'm quite old, and this is the 89 and beyond. We had before the Berlin Wall was still there, and I saw it myself. There was, as one of our academics calls it, free movement but little mobility. Yeah, so there was the right to move, but people didn't. Yeah, by and large, movement was very limited. It only started really, it then increased with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and in particular when we had the accession of the Eastern European member states in 2004, and then again in 2007 when Bulgaria and Romania joined, in 2004 as you know. We had Poland, Estonia, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Lithuania, and Latvia, and the Czech Republic, and Hungary. So from then on, migration became more of an issue, and but it's still, if we look at the aggregate data, which is not easy to do because the statistics are very hit and miss. You know, we do not have good data about an issue that has defined the agenda so much and about which everyone is so exercised. So if you bring together EU data and international OECD data and so on, you will see that the share of EU citizens living in the UK currently of the whole of the British population in 2009 was no more than 3%. Yeah, so that's EU residents in the UK. I mean, you know, it's 3%. The same is true for Germany and their EU residents. Yeah, migration is a big issue, but we have to be careful about who's migrating. And there's you know, the non-EU migration. Then there's migration from the US and Australia and so on. But really, within the EU migration, despite the fact it's such a big issue, on aggregate, it's rather small. Yeah, even though it has increased, so it was even less before. So really, this is how many we have. But nevertheless, with the accession, anxiety was building. And, you know, as we know, public anxiety and actual statistics do not always correspond neatly. And so there was the question how to deal with these migrants and their dependency on welfare. In that regard, what we can say, if we look at the statistics, is, I'm not telling you the statistics in detail, but if we compare demographically the profile of the working age population, Britain, and nationals from the accession states, so this is particularly the countries that people are worried about, Eastern Europe, the poorer countries, then we can say in terms of their likelihood to be employed, to be studying, is higher than the EU natives, than the UK nationals. So you have EEA nationals, 64% are employed, whereas 58% of UK nationals are employed in this country. 6% are studying, 3% of new UK nationals are studying, and so on. So they, it's not like these people are abusing or in any way not active. They are, on average, contributing more. Yeah. So that's, and they are younger as well. So and we have studies, macroeconomic studies, which argue that they have contributed to growth of the economy. And maybe we can use the academic sector just as an example of how this kind of influx generates economic strength. So, so that not that many, and quite economically quite vibrant. Of course, not everybody. So what about welfare state dependency? EU migrants have the right to, as workers, the right to benefits and all welfare state rights as any other UK resident. Yeah, so that has been the situation. All workers, all self-employed, have the right to claim, and there's also those, if you come here, like if I lost my job, touch wood I won't, but if I do, I have the right to claim benefits as every other person because I have had long-term employment. So this is, there's equality, And there's students and self-sufficient people, and they can also, if they can demonstrate that they have the means to stay, they are also allowed to stay just as normal citizens. So this has been, the government has tried to reduce these rights in the run-up of Brexit and even before the Brexit vote. And the main issue, the problem is, because of freedom of movement, there must be equal treatment. And they couldn't just say, well, migrants get worse, or we cut their entitlements, we can't cut. They can't do that. Yeah. So what they have done was they tried to look at migrants' entitlements, migrants' type of employment, and to argue, is this gainful enough, or could we, based on the type of their employment, reduce their entitlement to benefits? And it was basically, they tried to through the back door restrict access to benefits, whereas actually there wasn't much evidence that migrants, or there wasn't any evidence that the migrants were claiming more or were claiming benefits in an abusive way at all. So that wasn't very successful. I think the main thing is to say, yes, it is for up until now pretty much EU migrants have identical rights to the welfare state, to the British welfare state, as all of you with British citizenship. Now, what can happen? Yeah, so they have these rights, have had these rights, and they have used them to be productive members of this society. What will happen after Brexit? It's not very clear, of course. Yeah, but there's the anxiety of what might happen. One big area for those of us like myself who have been here for a long time is that the EU has regulated our pension rights. Yeah, and for everyone who moves, we have the right to claim the benefits from our host country and home country, add them together. They are uprated and fairly calculated, so we are not disadvantaged, and then we can claim them in any European Union country where we'd like to be. We can go back, or we can stay, or we can move to Spain, or and we will get benefits. It's not clear what's going to happen with these rights. Yeah, can I, for instance, should I decide to retire in Berlin, can I take my accrued pension biography and claim the money in Berlin? I don't know. What will happen with this. I don't know what will happen. Should I retire here and just rely on the fact I have spent almost 20 years now, full employment and so on? Is there new rules that will say to me, I can't do this? I do not have full rights once I'm no longer a worker. Yeah, that is creating insecurity for us, and so that's that we don't know. For the newcomers or the people who haven't been here for so long, I'm sure they not. They really do not know whether it'll be possible that as workers or as students, whether they will still have the same rights as citizens, and this will mean that they might just not be as prepared to come here, and that their efforts, that they are economically active, but the welfare state has always. It's good to know that you can get some housing benefit, or that you can, if you're that there's some child benefit or something to help you in situations when you are, especially when you're settling in. And we don't know if that's no longer there. It'll definitely make it less attractive for people who have contributed so far quite well to this economy to come. And I have heard from a young couple, for instance, both very good workers, and they had been really excited to come and work here. And by now, after the Brexit vote, they are now both gone to Germany, and they work there, and they will make their future there. And I know for a fact that it was a result of this vote, that they just weren't sure about their future here. So yeah, that's, I think, is all I want to say.
Thank you very much, Professor Meyer. Now, I think at this point it would be very good if we actually turned to a more legal perspective, and of course that's something which we're very grateful that Dr. Syngellakis can bring to us. So I hand the chair back to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation and having me here. And while you were talking about the workers' rights, it was running through my mind the stability and the rules that we have in place, and they're going to go out of the window. I felt very sad as I was listening to you. My career started in the early 1990s, and I think I was lucky that I came at a time of euphoria. It was all the expectations, a rise in expectations about 1992 and the single market. And you may recall, some of you, that one of the architects of the policies was the British Commissioner, Lord Caulfield, who had gone native and embraced the European ideals and did an excellent job. But 1990s was also the time of Maastricht, which was a game changer, with the euro, and with the European Union turning more political project, more openly political project. So I watched through my career a downhill trajectory, and I would like to think it was not my fault that as I finished my sort of career, the UK is getting out of the European Union. It's been quite sad to observe this. And it is also ironic that the legal framework that controls the UK exit is also authored by a British diplomat, Lord Kerr. And in an interview he was saying that he never in his wildest dreams imagined that Britain would be the first to use this article. So here we are. What I can talk about and what I can contribute is a analysis and annotation, if you like, of Article 50, and I see that you have some copies of it. So that's one thing that I can talk about, what this article means, how, and talk about it in the light of what we know now through the notification letter of the Prime Minister, and on the basis also of the European Union draft negotiated guidelines, which have been published and which will be confirmed on the 29th of April. So that's one thing. The other thing I can contribute to is the options open to the United Kingdom, and these options are in three fronts. It's the relationship with the European Union itself, is relationships with other countries, and then the so-called fallback position, the WTO option, that if all fails, the UK can always trade under WTO rules. And there we have the question whether this is a readily available and beneficial option. So I will start with Article 50, and I would like to pick out a couple of things. I could talk practically about every single word of it, because in a legal text, as most of us know, each word is of significance and can be analyzed and interpreted. So the letter of the Prime Minister and the European Union guidelines have shed a lot of light of how this works, how it's going to work. What they have, so I won't say too much about this unless there are questions afterwards. But I would rather talk about what the article does not say. And what it does not say is whether the letter of notification can be revoked. A lot has been discussed about it, and the conclusion that I have drawn is that legal opinion is divided, and there are very solid arguments on both sides that it can be revoked, it cannot be revoked, but the overall spirit in which these negotiations will be conducted, I feel that the spirit is one of goodwill. The European Union is a very well-oiled machine. It's primed for consensus. It's primed for reaching agreement. It's not out there to kill the prospects of agreement. And therefore, the overall opinion is that if it were to be revoked, that would be legally and politically possible from the perspective of the European Union. The European Union would not turn around and say no. However, culturally and politically, it seems that it will be a very hard thing for the United Kingdom to do. Now, the European Parliament came into this issue, and in its own resolution on the negotiations inserted a clause saying that if there is a revocation, then it cannot be unilateral. All 27 have to consent. And this is to safeguard from abuse, because conceivably, if negotiations run into trouble, the UK could withdraw the letter, stop the 2 years time running, and then notify again, which of course is unimaginable that it would happen, but it is a possibility. So the European Parliament came in and said, if there is such an eventuality, then the consent of the 27 is needed. Now, ultimately, whether it can be revoked or not, the letter of notification is, the interpretation is down to the European Court of Justice, and I think it's last week that an Irish barrister filed papers in the High Court in Dublin trying to force a reference to the European Court of Justice on this issue. So in the legal world, there is a lot that is happening. The other aspect that it is of interest, and it is a little bit far-fetched, but it's been discussed in the legal literature, is the first line of the article, which says that the member state shall notify the European Council of its intention. Now, what does that mean? Is it notifying its decision to withdraw or its intention? Because intentions change. So that also is something that we cannot answer. It's there, but there is no certainty about it. So, and interestingly, the letter of the Prime Minister also talks about notifying the intention to withdraw. So that's something in the mix. The other thing that it is interesting about the article is that both sides envisage a transitional agreement that will possibly be necessary. And it is interesting that the UK seems to envisage that there will be an agreement in place and there will be an implementation period. Whereas the European Union, in its draft guidelines, seems to be thinking that the 2-year period will not be enough and there will have to be a transitional agreement to make it possible for the negotiations to go on. So that, again, is something that they don't seem to see eye to eye. But the European Parliament came again into this and said in its own resolution that transitional agreement should not last longer than 3 years. So there is a time limit there as well. And of course, what is interesting is that if there is a transitional agreement, throughout that period, the UK will continue to be bound by its duties to the European Union. It would be as though it never left while there is a transitional agreement in place. So there are all these considerations. Now, I don't think I would say anything more about Article 50 itself, but again, I can answer questions if you would like some more clarification. On the second point, what options does the United Kingdom have? As I mentioned, there are 3 fronts: the agreement with the European Union itself, and what the Prime Ministers. First of all, what Article 50 says is that the withdrawal agreement has to take into account the framework of the relationship. And that's again a question mark. What does that mean, the framework? As you probably are all aware, we now know that there won't be parallel negotiations of the withdrawal agreement and the future relationship agreement. But in the second phase, there may be an overlap. And I think it is understood and it stands to reason that a fully negotiated relationship agreement is not possible in the less than 2 years that we have for negotiations. Negotiations are not going to start until June, and they're scheduled to go on until the autumn 2018, and then there is a period for the Parliament, for Parliament to consider. So the time is very short, and the time is controlled by the EU, not by the UK. So this future relationship, the Prime Minister's letter and the guidelines talk about an ambitious free trade agreement, bold and ambitious free trade agreement. Now, what that means? Interestingly, the notification letter is not very businesslike. It's very vague and not really to the point. The draft guidelines are far more precise and far more precise. For example, yes, they talk about this bold and ambitious free trade agreement, but they also say that this future relationship must ensure a level playing field, must ensure that there is fair competition and there is no sort of undue state aid, and safeguards against dumping, fiscal, social, and environmental. So these are exactly the sort of things that in political debates the UK was hinting at being a low regulation, low taxation place after Brexit. And the EU says, no way. So this future relationship will be subjected to this, what the European Parliament calls adherence to standards. So that's the detail, this is the sting in the tail, this adherence to standards. And I could talk about that more if needed. Now, with third countries, what can the United Kingdom do? We all hear about the trade missions that everybody seems to be going on, from the Prime Minister to Liam Fox and everybody else. The legal fact is that they cannot conclude anything until after Brexit. And again, it stands to reason because the other countries cannot negotiate, even if they're willing, because they don't know the standing of the UK vis-à-vis the EU. So they can't formulate a trade agreement. So it's very complicated. And you may have heard the latest development that the Commission is very weary of allowing British officials in trade negotiations. There is some nervousness about the UK spying on the EU's negotiation techniques. The EU has just embarked on a major negotiation with Australia, for example. So that's a bit of a sensitive point at the moment. Now, all in all, in this negotiation process, it seems to me the conclusion that I have drawn is that the UK will be negotiating to achieve what the UK already had. An excellent deal with the best of the single market, cherry-picking the benefits of the European Union, while enjoying generous opt-outs from Schengen, from Euro, and the rest. So that's the picture that emerges from comparing the letter of the Prime Minister with the guidelines. It seems that the best that can be achieved is something similar, but this means that the UK will be bound by quite a lot of EU law and regulations. Otherwise, there will be a real tough environment for business. Very short about the Great Repeal Bill. I think that most of us have seen through it. It's not a Great Repeal Bill, it's a misnomer, it's a complete rhetorical trickery. Yes, the European Communities Act 1972, it will be repealed, and this is great, a great event. But nothing else will be repealed. EU law will be imported wholesale. It will be renamed UK law. Case law will be in place. Cases now in the Court of Justice will go through and will be binding. And then it will be up to the Parliament to amend or repeal EU law in the future. Otherwise, it will stay there. Nobody knows how long. There are a lot of issues around the Great Repeal Bill that have been debated in the public domain, and we have heard about it being a power grab from Westminster and from the devolved administrations. Again, what this taking back control of the legislation tells me is that there will be no place to hide for the politicians. There would no longer be Brussels to blame. They will own the policies, they will own the laws, and whatever the result, there will be no hiding place. Brussels will be gone. So they will have to face the music and do their best. Of course, some Tories, as you know, would like to see a great bonfire of all these laws. This will not happen because it would create a legal black hole into which all the businesses will fall because they would not be able to trade without regulatory framework. And lastly, about the WTO trading facility. Is it readily available? It has. I know that in the press, the pro-Brexit press and analysts, etc., say that we always have the WTO. We can trade under WTO rules, and that's fine, no problem. Now there are two aspects to it. The first is the UK? Can the UK have immediate, ready access to WTO rules? Yes and no. The UK has been a member of the WTO since its creation in 1995, but its membership is bundled up with the membership of the European Union. and they will have to disentangle the two. When there is a meeting of the 164 members of the WTO, it is the EU Trade Commissioner that conducts the negotiations. They negotiate as a bloc to maximize power, negotiating power. Individual member states retain the legal right to object if their national interest is not served by what the EU is negotiating, but this happens very rarely. And therefore, in the WTO, it's the EU that negotiates and votes on behalf of its 28 member states. So the UK has to negotiate its disentanglement from this and to be a member in its own exclusive right. It's not there yet. Liam Fox has started the talking, but it will take quite a while. And the second issue is that the UK will have to negotiate its own schedule of tariffs. They need a baseline in order to negotiate trade agreements with other countries. And this schedule of tariffs is not in place. And it will take quite a while to negotiate it and agree it. A lot of studies have been done. The Institute of Fiscal Studies, for example, has said that on the substance of the matter, I mean, these are the technicalities, but on the substance, would it be good? Would it be favorable trading environment? The Institute of Fiscal Studies has said that there will be a very, very rough ride because of tariffs, because of customs regulations, because all sorts of difficulties to trade. And of course, WTO rules are mostly about goods. Negotiating tariffs regarding agriculture is not so easy, and it's a different kind of set of rules, agriculture. And of course, Australia and New Zealand will have something to say about that. And also, WTO does not really cover services. So all in all, what I conclude is that, yes, the UK can do it, but it seems like reinventing the wheel to not an awful lot of advantage, as far as I can conclude on the basis of the knowledge we have at the moment.
Thank you, Dr. Syngellakis. Now, part of the magic of how this is developing, as whenever you turn a kaleidoscope, it appears in a different way than it did before. We've looked at linguistics, we've looked at academics, we've looked at employment, we've looked at legalities in a fairly precise way. And so now we conclude these short presentations with Councillor Bogle's presentation, which will look even more clearly at some of those areas we haven't looked at so far in terms of logistics, in terms of business, in terms of the impact of geography. So over to you.
Right. Thank you very much for inviting me today. As I say, as a local politician, I've got pretty much an opinion on all sorts of stuff on this, and we could talk all night, I'm sure. But what I'm going to try and talk about a bit more is industry, business, because actually that the voices of business and industry have been mixed. You know, there have been quite a lot of optimism as well as pessimism, and depending on which sector you operate in. And generally, though I don't think they'll be the deciding factors. I think the legal aspects in particular will probably decide a lot of these sectors' fate. They have a way of sort of, certainly the big industries anyway, will have a way of sort of finding their way round whatever comes along in the next few years. Certainly, I don't claim to be an expert. I used to work in industry. I used to work in logistics for about 15 years of my working life, mostly with manufacturing and sometimes with other aspects of industry. But it was, yes, there's not a lot of it left, unfortunately. We don't manufacture very much in this country. We are a net importer, as I'm sure you're all aware. All the ships that come in, they're heavy and they go out much lighter. We don't make an awful lot of stuff people want to buy. What's left in manufacturing is pretty good, because it's really, it has to be good to survive. But their supply chains are very complex, and a lot of the goods that are part of those supply chains are travelling across borders all the time, and particularly the car industry, as well as rely heavily on basically stuff being on the roads the whole time, so they don't have expensive stock sitting in warehouses. I spent quite a lot of my time counting stock in my previous life and trying to minimise the amount of it, so it's a big preoccupation. So it's clear we're about to embark on what is an enormously complex exercise. We have been bound with this institution of the EU, and admittedly it's changed hugely for 40 years plus. And a lot of what we're about to embark on, we haven't done for a long time, and particularly trade negotiations. I'm pretty sure we don't have enough. I know there's a number of people who've said that we don't have enough trade negotiators, that it's going to be a huge task. And I think we're a bit unrealistic really what we can achieve, but we've got to let's look at some of the issues. There's a lot of different options that we could end up with. I'm hoping that some sense is found, that at least we choose at least an off-the-shelf option if it's possible, something like Norway, like becoming a member of EFTA, even though as a transitional point, because at least that's fairly well worked through. It will upset lots of people because you still have to pay into the EU and you have freedom of movement and everything else. But it's still more complex in terms of trade, but it's certainly a lot easier than if we had to do it all by ourselves. There are 162 countries in the WTO, and my understanding is that things have to come to a consensus. So you can imagine how long that might take. So I think we're being far too optimistic in terms of what we can achieve in the short term, and particularly people like Liam Fox with his non-job, and in fact he can't do anything at the moment. But so I like everyone on this panel, the level of uncertainty is probably the biggest thing to grapple with, and it's certainly having an impact on many sectors of industry. And as I say, the logistics industry, which is the one I worked in for many years, I mean, though they have some quite interesting proposals, they're also saying one of the immediate impacts they have experienced is the impact of labour shortages, skill shortages, and they are the third biggest sector in the country in terms of employment, and partly because I think people don't think of it. It's not just lorries, it's not just containers, it's ports, it's airports, it's supply chains, it's IT systems, it's quite a large sector of employment, and traditionally has been quite a Cinderella industry in some ways in terms of professionalism, and only in the last maybe couple of decades has started to become more seen as a profession, and so we've got quite a big skills gap in that sector, and that has been filled. At least 10% of those vacancies are filled by EU nationals, and they're already seeing people, and particularly things like where there's skill shortages, like HGV drivers, because it's highly skilled, it's very tough, it's well paid if you do this sort of really dangerous stuff like driving chemicals around the country, but a lot of the drivers are old and retired, and it's young EU nationals are taking those jobs. So at the moment, so I mean, obviously you could take a positive spin on that and say, here's an opportunity to really upskill and get kids in school thinking about that as a career. But the time to turn this around is not going to be 2 years. It's going to be maybe 10 years or 15 years. So in the interim, like most sectors, one of the key demands from that sector is saying we need some assurances early on about the status of EU nationals and whether they can stay and work here, because we need them, at least in the short term. Yes, we're happy to sort of do lots of stuff to market our industry more effectively and do all sorts of clever things, but in the short term, that's a big issue. And then I actually, because I am a bit rusty on this, I must admit, and I used to belong to a member of one of the professional institutes. I ceased to become a member, so I had a look at what they've recommended to government, and thankfully they have actually been asked to come up with some ideas, so that's positive. They're called the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, and they brought a panel of experts together on all range of stuff. So I thought I'd just mention a few things that they propose. I would say, like most groups of commercial people, they're a lot less doom and gloom than probably us lot. They're very constructive, they identify the risks, but they also identify opportunities. And I suppose what I would encourage, even though I'm very much a Remainer, is that now this decision has been made, we've got to figure out a way of mitigating this decision, or the effects, the negative impacts of the decision, and also and try and prevent this sort of hard right Tory version of Brexit, which I don't think anybody voted for, and try to come up with a solution that is, as you say, probably keeps most of what we already had, but tries to sort of point out that some of the things that are just literally will push us over a cliff, particularly economically, and will probably affect the people most at the bottom of our society the most, and who are already getting hammered by all sorts of other things at the moment. So some of the things that they've said, which was quite interesting, was, obviously ideally they want to remain in the single market and they want to remain in the customs union, which is a bit of a no-brainer because all the paperwork and the systems, it's all geared up to actually use all the same sort of standards and rules and everything else. And obviously tariffs are global; they're not just EU, and there's tariff codes that you use on paperwork. But once you start trading outside the EU, it becomes more complicated. When I used to do it with alcohol, which had the extra thing with all the customs. The minute you said, oh, it's coming from the EU or it's outside the EU or it's going in or out, there was additional paperwork, there was additional processes. There's usually stuff around things like origin, proving origin, if it's coming from somewhere outside the EU. There's a lot of stuff around whether or not you have to pay customs duty, because you don't obviously pay any customs duties because it's a free trade area. So very basic stuff, but all this stuff has to be processed and it adds cost to your trade, so which is why everyone thinks it's such a good thing. Pretty liberal setup. So that's what they prefer, but I think they recognise that single market probably isn't going to be where we're at. But what they're trying, the other thing interesting thing they said, and I hadn't really fully thought about this, was airports. At the moment we have a single skies thing policy. It's EU-wide, very sensible sort of thing. It's a bit of a massive bureaucracy that runs it, but it's a sensible idea about planes not crashing into each other and sort of common standards and stuff. And there's something called what we need to apparently negotiate is an air services agreement, a replacement of the current intra-EU rights, or else we'll have to do one with each individual country, which will be a bit of a nightmare. That's just one tiny bit that we've got to do. Another interesting thing they said was tariffs are not necessarily their biggest concern. They sort of felt that apart from certain sectors which are going to be really hammered, like the car industry is going to really struggle, I think, and a few other specific industries. World tariffs are apparently generally going down, and maybe those costs could be absorbed. But their biggest concern is border control. Border control is, and obviously the most significant border that's got to be sorted out damn pronto is the Irish border, because it'd be madness if things had to stop. So what they are arguing for, and I think this is quite interesting. So they're basically saying there's all sorts of stuff going on with changes and new digital arrangements. That one is apparently in a few years' time you'll be able to do a bit like a tax return, that instead of producing documents or doing it digitally at the point of trade, you actually do it in sort of afterwards. So you can sort of, as long as you're set up as a sort of authorised economic operator, I think is the word. Or there's something. It's all on .gov.uk if you want to find out, because I found out a lot recently when I was trying to research this. But apparently, if you register in your sort of level of competence and you've got the right professional sort of qualifications, you will then in a few years' time be able to trade with it all digitally and without having to stop and be checked and everything. But obviously, everything will have to be declared in a few years' time as well. So everything, contents of everything, the value of everything will have to be declared, and it's fiendishly complex stuff. And what they're asking the government to do is think, God help us, strategically and prioritise investment in key sectors. They're basically saying, we know not everyone's going to get, not everyone is going to, some sectors may do well, some sectors may do really badly, but the infrastructure around which we trade, and we are very much always have been a trading nation, and we are hugely reliant on imports, so we desperately have, unless we want to all change our lifestyles and not have convenience stores and open 24/7, we're going to have to sort of get this all sorted. And it's very much about early compliance with upcoming new legislation from the EU, something called the EU Union Customs Code, which came into law apparently in May last year, and nobody understands it yet, and there's transition in place till 2019, and basically becoming a sort of expert on all this stuff, so that we become a sort of leader in this. Because actually, I think we are quite good at trade, but it's just that we don't necessarily know how to negotiate trade deals. But actually, the business of getting stuff around and everything, we're quite good at that, and we're quite good at technology and quite good at innovative solutions. So they're basically saying if we can do lots of clever stuff around complying with all this stuff and investing in technology and that might mitigate some of the effects. So that's for me been quite interesting, because it wasn't necessarily just about tariffs. A lot of it's about fast tracking things, and interesting, they also put forward as sort of what they keep, what they wouldn't keep in the Great Repeal Bill. And the port service regulation is the one that seems to be hated the most. I know there's been a big campaign here in the port about that, so that seems to be number one on the list. But the rest of it they seem quite happy with, because there's a lot of sensible stuff that I think the problem with the EU, a lot of it is just very boring, because it's just so sensible, and a lot of it's just common standards, it's rules. So one of the, in logistics is things like, we want to keep the standards relating to interoperability of rolling stock. Well, of course you do. You don't want to get stuff go over the channel and it can't go any further. Or you don't want people to get to an airport and then not be able to move. You don't want to have this. So there's very, what I find very frustrating about the whole debate about the EU, most of the actual reality is it's just very practical stuff that you'd have to invent anyway if you didn't have it, if you know what I mean. So we're sort of cutting our nose to spite our face, because a lot of it is just very boring, sensible rules that standardise things across the piece, which means we can just get about our business without having to worry about changing every 5 minutes. So we are where we are. So I would say it's hugely complex. I mean, I've just got a tiny amount of information from one sector of industry who are being very constructive and engaging and have done their report, and it makes a really interesting read. God knows if the government's read it. I don't know if they're going to do anything with it, but that's just one sector, and I imagine every sector in the country will have done the same thing. Some will be heard, some won't. Who will get to that table? Who will influence? I mean, certainly as a local politician, as a local authority representative, I don't feel our voice is being heard, and we are hugely, we're going to hugely impact in terms of our funding and social cohesion. I mean, just the fact that there's so many people here. I live in Little Poland, it's fine, but in Fremantle, as they call it Little Poland, but it's just like we are where we are. It's not terrible, but there are. I don't know. I think everything's been sort of blown up. So I'll stop there, because I'm getting emotional now. So that's not ranting. But I was trying to be constructive, because I think we have to seize opportunities. If there are there to be had, we've got to seize them. And then there must be some, even though I can there's so many barriers and obstacles ahead. I can see that it's going to be very tricky, and I think the lawyers are going to have a field day.
They are.
Well, Anna, Traute, Sarah and Darren, we're really very, very indebted to you for the amount of preparation it took tonight for you to give us this launch into what we will now do in our debate. Just in order to give a little bit of housekeeping here, in about 45 minutes we'll all be milling around getting coffee and teas. Because of the number of us here tonight, we'll do it on a slightly less democratic level as normal. We'll just get that started in about half an hour in terms of cooking up some tea and coffee. And please, we'll bring some in, go to the entrance hatch if you can't find what you want, and we'll make more.
Actually, Graham, we're going to go and put the water on now,
great.
So if people want to come up in about 5 or 10 minutes or so.
Right, we'll get that going, but we'll have an opportunity for you to get what you want to refresh yourselves. Now, the way we'll do this is that obviously you may want to ask specific questions to specific panellists, and they would really appreciate that. If there are some questions which all of the panellists would like to make their evidence-based insights into those questions, then we'll do that also. And there may be some people who would like to actually make their own observation, their own statement, to express their own ideas. That's what Fabian's is all about. All I would say is, because of the tremendous number of us that are here tonight, try to do that as succinctly as possible. And if I do that, then maybe you could just bring it to a conclusion. And then nobody is going to behave as if we're United Airlines and drag you down the aisle or something. So let's take the first two here. If you both like to make your comments or ask your questions, and then we'll respond.
I mean, there's so much there, really, that you do need a day, don't you, really, on dealing with it. Thank you very much. Such a lot came out of that. I agree with the tone of the last contributor, which really was a positive one about, in fact, you've got to make the best of what it is we're faced with, and that's to do with the negotiation and getting the most out of that negotiation that you possibly can. I don't expect very much from the Conservative administration, so of course they would obviously fall down on the issue of markets. But I've got a general question, which I'll lead up to in a minute. And the general question is, to what extent is the left responsible for the position that we're actually in? Because what we have in the country is an unbalanced economy, an untrained workforce, low productivity, and an investment strike. There's references to the goodwill of the European Union. If you live in Greece, or in Portugal, or in Spain, or if you're a young person in France, you don't feel that goodwill. So an important question to ask is, to what extent has the left failed to demonstrate accountability and in seizing control of markets, getting involved in markets and influencing those to favour the populations which quite clearly are not happy. Of course we feel insecurities, we're the beneficiaries of those markets. So that's why we're all quite happy with the sort of arrangements. But many people in the European Union are not beneficiaries of that market, and that's why we're in the position that we're in. So to what extent is the left throughout the European Union, as well as in Britain, responsible for the circumstances we find ourselves in?
Patrick?
Yes, mine's a very narrow point. Sarah touched very briefly on the Irish border issue. Until the recent hoo-ha, it never crossed my mind the Gibraltar-Spain problem. It is presumably the same thing. Could the panellists just say a little more about this border issue and how it will be or might be resolved?
Good. Now, part of this was a direct indictment of two people that are councillors at the moment. Are you both to blame for getting us into this mess? And if so, what have you got to say about it? And then perhaps our other two less guilty panellists can answer the other part of Patrick's question, which is also fascinating.
Do you want to go first or shall I?
I've got something to go first. You can take that one for the team.
I think the political class, particularly those who actually favour the EU, have failed this country. And we had an opportunity, particularly when we had the Labour government under Tony Blair, to make a very positive case for the EU. We could have probably nationalised the railways and done all sorts of things, and nobody would have been that bothered. Because there was that sort of euphoria in the late 90s where you could literally pretty much walk on water. Didn't last, obviously. But and we didn't take that opportunity, and we have colluded in the denigration and the sort of and the negativity around the EU for a long period of time, and allowed the right-wing press to sort of just set that agenda and not really ever countered it with anything that is remotely as emotionally impactful. You know, you might have talked about, and I'm probably as guilty as the next, I've had lots of rows on doorsteps about the EU, and my usual counter to most of those people, particularly in areas where, I suppose they call the left behind, whatever you like to call it, whether it's in Lee Park or in St Mary's or in Bitton or whatever, actually not so much St Mary's actually, but more inner city is different, but the outer areas of the city particularly, and areas which feel left behind, it's often about what have they ever done for us, and it's all like what the Romans have ever done for us, and I have to sort of keep going on about things like, well, if we didn't have the EU, we'd probably run out of fish in the sea, or you probably have died at work, or, you know, I'll slightly elaborate, but, you know, it's trying to say, well, these are really practical, useful things that we've done as a result of working together, and the single size I mentioned earlier, but it's sensible stuff, and we're working together on so many things, and it just makes it easier, you know. You wouldn't be able to go for those cheap holidays, you know, and you wouldn't be able to, there's so many practical, you know, mobile phone charges wouldn't be going down
roaming
so
charges.
much. You know, and even the most sort of you know, sort of really, really selfish arguments don't seem to get through, because we have really failed on the left, I think. Well, I can't really speak for the whole left of the Europe, because I wouldn't have a clue really where to start. But I think we haven't made the case. The only other point I wanted to make is, I think as a Labour Party particularly, we've been very poor in industrial policy. We came to it incredibly late, at the very fag end of the Labour government, and it frustrated the hell out of me as someone who'd worked in manufacturing and seen it just... I mean, I worked basically for a company that had lots of plants in Europe, and we were the easiest to shut. We were the best performing. We had 99% service on time and full. We were loved by our customers, but it wasn't enough because our unit costs were too high, because we didn't have loads of warehouses full of stuff everywhere. We did it on time, something. And it was so frustrating to see that happen, to see the manufacturing go to a very inefficient plant in Germany, and various other places. And I was like, oh, you know, because it was just easier to virus. So that was nothing to do with being part of the EU. That was just, our employment policy. So, but we have never had a very muscular. Everyone's talked about rebalancing the economy, but come on, I mean, we are really late now to this party, and we are a service economy. So I don't quite know where that's all going to go. So I'll rant over, sorry, but I think we have failed, but I don't think it's necessarily just the left's fault. But I think the left are very good at beating themselves up and then not doing anything about it. We need to actually turn that around a bit. The left is in a state of crisis in Europe generally, that I would agree with, across the world. So we've got some bigger problems like just justifying our existence. But we could start with this in terms of our response to these sort of crises rather than being woe's me. I think that's probably.
So Darren, as the Romanians would say, vinovat sau nevinovat. Guilty or not guilty?
Probably because we're guilty for most things. I think from the council's point of view. I mean, I would say, as ever, starting with a broad term like the left, because there's always been a Eurosceptic Benite left, to be honest. So even talking about, is the left responsible for it? Well, if there were things that we should have been aware of, that we should have been making a better case for, etc., then I think there are different parts of the left that would be responsible for that. I think from a Labour left and a Labour government point of view, from those days, I think there were various things that we got wrong or that we undersold. One of them, and I say this as a university lecturer, I think our ambition to get 50% of students into university was, whether that figure was right or not, frankly, I don't know, and we've passed that moment. What it did mean is that we took our eye off the ball with vocational education, and we completely fluffed that one, and we allowed, because of, I think, a laudable and an admirable... I mean, I was a product of this. I was the first one in my family to stay in education beyond 16, let alone get to university. So I'm never going to denigrate the Labour government's efforts to do that because I'm a beneficiary of it. However, in doing that and in pushing for that so hard, we allowed this dichotomy to be there to say, well, actually, that is the only path now, and the kind of prestige of vocational education, vocational qualifications, that route fell away in a way that actually Germany does brilliantly well on. And, we're just getting back to that now. We've done a lot of work in this city on apprenticeships and shown that actually you can get this through 2 degree level apprenticeships, and you can do so with far less debt than you rack up now. So I think that was one way that we probably let it down. I think we, as Sarah says, failed to seize on a number of opportunities to just be bolder in what we were doing nationally and domestically, but out of many of the benefits and the trade kind of benefits that we got from being part of the EU. I think one thing that we became silent on was, or we just we let the right take this argument about, it started as a trade agreement, that's all we ever wanted, that's all we ever signed up for in 1974 or whenever it was, and it became so much more. And I think that's a positive thing. I think we moved on from a relationship that basically said, how can we make money out of each other, to then talk about those people with whom we work and from whom we are profiting. How do we strengthen together our moral duty to ensure that they're well paid, that they're looked after, that they have rights, that there is equality in the workplace between men and women, and that there's equality of kind of parental leave and all those kind of things that contribute to, I think, one of the many good things that we got out of Europe, and that we stop it being a race to the bottom. And I think that's something that came out of our relationship with the EU. So I'm quite glad that it became something more than just a trading deal. That we got to the issue of common rights across not just a trading area, but a cultural area. We are part of Europe. Yes, we're an island obviously in a geographical sense. That'll never change. But actually being culturally part of Europe, I think we did very well out of that as well.
Now, taking a jump from that, which is absolutely a very good springboard to go to Anna and Traute now.
Can I just interrupt very quickly?
Yes.
the water's boiled. It's occurred to me that actually getting people to all come over to the work. So maybe if some of the EC members could take orders for tea and coffee.
Can we do this a little bit like an Anglican communion? Can 4 or 5 sort of make their way from anywhere to get the tea and coffee, and then make your way back? Some people might be more thirsty than others, and also the conveniences are in that direction. Now taking this, please help yourself to tea and coffee as you will. But this springboard, which really Patrick made a very valuable intervention, which I'm quite sure now we're going to be able to broaden out, that there is a geographical factor here that actually puts the lie through Patrick's excellent question to Theresa May's idea that we're leaving the European Union, but somehow we're staying in Europe. Now, we've got this rocky situation of Gibraltar. But if anybody read The Economist this week or The Guardian last weekend, actually it draws out a number of other things that all 27 countries are likely to want to raise with Britain. So we've clearly got Gibraltar, where Michael Howard suggests we might want to go to war with Spain, but we've also got France and Spain that have absolute historical rights with a former independent Britain to British fishing waters that are absolutely established in tradition and history. We also have discovered where the Greeks lost their marbles. I saw them the other day in the British Museum, and you can be sure that before they sign off on any agreement, the marbles are going to be raised, and they don't belong to Elgin, they belong to Athens. And then we have that little problem from 2003 of Le Touquet, and the French are saying the migrants that want to come to Britain are absolutely not going to hang around in Calais anymore. We have a tunnel, and we're going to send them under, and they're going to be dealt with in Dover in 2 years' time. They've made that quite clear. And then there are those little post-colonial problems that are going to be raised again in Malta. And so, we know for sure that it's not just the rocky consequences of Gibraltar. So how do we open that geographical problem of staying in Europe?
May I say something about Gibraltar, because I knew it was going to come up. So I copied exactly what has been said about it. And what the guidelines say is, after the UK leaves the Union, no agreement between EU and UK may apply to the territory of Gibraltar without the agreement between the Kingdom of Spain and the UK. So it's not exactly like has been presented in the press. It's not a veto of Spain, because it clearly says that there has to be an agreement between the UK and Spain. So if there is some issue, the two of them has to sit together and discuss it. So it is a little bit less aggressive that I think has been presented, but that's what it says. That's the guideline, that Spain and the UK will have to discuss whatever agreements there are going to be.
So Liam Fox has got a job.
Possibly. Possibly.
I have two. I'm thinking about what the left did wrong, but maybe let's say something about the historical situation and taking a very long view. I think for me as a German who has been in, has seen the wall fall literally in Berlin when it fell. Europe is the history of the EU is about peace and about stability in a country that was destroyed by war after committing the most atrocious crime in the whole of Europe. France, Germany has a certain relationship, Italy, these are the continental countries that form the coal and steel community as a means to achieve peace and stability in Europe. The UK was always had a different position in that constellation, and I think that this is, has always been a different, just produced different tensions, different feelings, and so in that way, it's not surprising. It is the UK doing this also as a very global nation. Having been in this country, having lived in this country, it's the most open country of the whole of the EU in a way. France is very insular. Germany isn't as open in terms of, where do you find people like us, working in the way we do? It's here. It's not in France, definitely. The French, they all speak French. They don't want people like us there. Honestly, it's not Italy. It's not Italy either. It's not, we don't hear, I edit a European journal. I don't hear much from France. I don't hear much from Italy. But we are, it's the Germans doing it based in the UK. So there is something global going on, and I think it's also maybe the EU needs to recognize more what each country has to bring, and taking into account this long-standing history, and that is Britain. The UK is an empire, ex-empire, with all the that comes with it. So I think that needs to be taken into account. With regard to the left, I think the left has done, under Blair and the New Labour has done a lot for social inequality. They did it under stealth because they are afraid, and they had good reason to be afraid after these long years in the wilderness, which are now coming back, unfortunately. So that was right, but they should have been more upfront about the EU as a project, and they didn't do that. I think that was really timid, and I never understood it, and it was a real shame. And one thing they also should have done, and it's too late now, is electoral reform. So, to exclude the voices of those who feel marginalised. Why can't we have UKIP in Parliament? It's a tragedy we don't, because they need to be there. And we also need to have a stronger Lib Dems in Parliament, and and this is a real. That I think the left did wrong. The Labour should have done.
Excellent. No, we have a question at the back. Is there anybody else that would like to comment? Right. So we have 3. 1, 2, 3 in that order, and we'll respond to those as well.
The Professor made the point I was going to make about really a huge part of your point of Europe being about peace, and I think Britain utterly neglects that side of it. So thank you for that point. But as an employee of the NHS, I think the NHS is going to utterly collapse if we lose a lot of our European friends and partners and employees there. But I have 2 questions, if I may come to those. One of them is that the question was around the role of the left and have they made sufficient argument in this, but really I would ask what is the role of the media been in suppressing the voices of the left and trying to bring forward the positive aspects of the EU, because I personally feel media has played a huge role in suppressing those voices, and I'd be interested in the views of the panel. And secondly, I was fascinated by the legal discussion and the word intention too. There's been no voice yet saying, is there any possibility of revoking this if we stand together with intellectual argument and potentially back some political leaders to actually make some attempt to oppose this? What is the view of the whole hall about this? Because I haven't heard any opposition to this going ahead being raised yet. Excellent.
Yes?
Is it fair that sort of the older generation are those who are blamed, they were the most in favour of Brexit? The reason for my question, my parents coming up for 80 were in absolute floods of tears the day after because of the result, because they were such fervent Remainers. They were born before the Second World War. So is it fair that all of the older generation are blamed as being the age group most pro-Brexit?
One more here. Chris?
Yes, I was going to say that all these arguments, very erudite, technically competent, thank you very much, it misses the emotive core, the anxieties that fuel this whole debate. And we can talk in this room about, well, what are the chances of revoking our intention, quote unquote, but we don't get to the emotive argument really, which it's not about the regulations and all of the detail. It's the fact that we've got a different national story. We didn't come together emotively to found the EU. We weren't part of that need to come together, to collaborate, huddle together, be strong and united, because we had our own proud, independent nation story. And that's what the left out place. It left out flag, it left out belonging, all these things which are emotive. And that's what technical arguments, however erudite, and I completely agree with them, I think it's an act of national self-harm, but still, that's what you're up against.
The faith, flag and family of the UK. One more at the back.
I'm a French national, and I think actually is another story of the debate. I think us as EU national have got the responsibility of Brexit by very often be isolationist and creating ghettos within every city. You go to some park in London, and I heard French, and only French, and everybody we don't communicate with, I don't communicate with French people in London, but the mix, we did create ghettos, and because of that, it was perceived by the outside of Southampton you were describing as really threatening. I think we let that happen. I mean, I'm saying the EU national who refused to, in some mix.
Sarah, would you like to kick off?
Okay.
I was in a meeting just this last week with somebody that was talking about procurement for the National Health Service, not just employment. And apparently there is a strict government policy at the moment to cut as much as possible the procurement from EU countries so that they will be forced to renegotiate with us. And it's on the premise of a poor NHS for poor people. So there are going to be changes in employment and in procurement.
Okay, I'll touch on some of the points. I think it has been, and I think the reason, if you like, take back control, whatever, it's a very powerful emotional message, and it got through much more than any of you like the technocratic type arguments. And I think there's a lot to learn from that from a political point of view as much as anything. But
not that those people ever had any control.
Well, but for the first time, for many people, it probably felt that their vote really mattered. And I know a lot of people really anguished about it. I remember having conversations with, people like my hairdresser and all those sort of people, who genuinely really sort of wrestled with the issues and were trying to make sense of what is a very complex decision. And I think there is some, and it's been quite, there's so much being written at the moment, it's quite bewildering. But one thing I read recently was quite interesting about all the stuff about English identity, well, not British, because I think British is sort of, I don't know where that's going, but English, the Englishness thing, which I know John Denham's quite obsessed about, he does lots of stuff on, and I expect you know all about that, but, and I never quite know if I think it's a load of hokum or if it's actually worth really getting your head round. But the faith, flag and country, there is. I mean, I studied history for my sins, and English nationalism is a strange and conservative and reactionary beast, and it generally our history is littered literally with reactions against the other, and the other. I mean, when I studied history, I did a lot of stuff about anti-Catholicism, and it particularly became more accelerated when it was felt that those people who were Catholics were getting the rights back, basically, because they were sort of seen as the enemies of the state until about the mid-18th century. And then about late 18th century, they were given some rights back, and there was this big riot and everything. It was like it was all the sort of the start of the jingoism and the what's that image of George, and around George III's time, and that was the start of real English nationalism. And it's a very strange beast, but we still live in a very conservative country. It is a very, and there is a narrative and a national story that is very powerful that we need to sort of acknowledge. I don't believe in it myself personally, but I'm one of those who's descended from European migrants and feels quite international, and I'm comfortable in that world. But it's not comfortable for everyone, and you're right that there are divisions, and it is difficult, and a lot of people are getting poorer, and particularly white working class communities, and I can see that anger, but it's not as simple as class versus other class either, and it's not as simple as the age thing either, because it's not just about cities versus countryside, but there is an element of that as well. So I'm worried about all this division talk, so we've got to somehow come find out where we have common ground. I'm sure there must be some, but it has been incredibly upsetting and divisive, a lot of the stuff. So a lot of the language and the press, as you say, have been very, very difficult to respond to. So I don't really have any answers to them. I think they're really good points. I mean, I just think we've both got to seek to understand, and it's the irrational, emotional stuff we've got to understand. But we've still got to engage our brains and actually get to grips with the actual detail. And the detail is technocratic and boring, but someone's got to do it. So, but at the same time, we've got to try to draw out a narrative that is a bit more, dare I say it, progressive. I hate that word as well. But trying to sort of, because I think we're losing what is actually a very, very culturally and rich and liberal country that actually is very open and generally very tolerant. I lived in France for a short time, and I did, like you said, very nationalistic. I mean, it was quite a long time ago. It was about the time of the rise of Le Pen, and I felt very uncomfortable. I'm very uncomfortable for my friends who came from North African countries who were just treated like second-class citizens. I mean, it may have improved a bit, but it's still not great. So, generally speaking, and I'm married to a non-EU immigrant, and I'm descended from immigrants, and I've got lots of, generally this country is generally quite tolerant, and all this sort of bile is actually not really what the English are about, and that's what's so frustrating about it. It's all sort of mad, and then when you see what happens after that, the terrorist, that horrible incident, how that London, how it came together, you just it's not like that, and that's what I was thinking about all this.
No, so that's absolutely right, and we do need to be absolutely passionate about this and make sure that our passion drives towards a perspective. Before we come to another question, Anna, we have 1,000 years of jurisprudence in Britain, a uniquely long-term progression of a direction that Britain has been on legally. It's 100 years since the end of the First World War. It's 70 years since the end of the Second World War. This is a point where we obviously have an opportunity to rethink. Is there a direction that we could be taking that would lead us to a vision that might have some positive benefits at this point? We've spoken about electoral reform. We ought to bring back the idea of what we're going to do with the House of Lords now. Are we going to be able to keep the nation together? Is this a nation that can actually be a united kingdom for very long?
Well, I think that the whole Brexit thing has thrown up so many issues that I think it is becoming technically difficult to deal with all these issues at once, because they all come at once. Scotland wants this, English nationalism wants that, everything. So it is the time factor and the capacity factor. It's the capacity to deal with, as I was saying, to reinvent things. It's like going back going back to things to reinvent and do the same thing as it used to be, driven by nostalgia and the emotive core and the anxieties. So yes, of course, this many things can be done, but not all at once, and there are limits of capacity and time. And the other sad thing that comes out of this discussion is that the Prime Minister has sort of embraced the slogan of global Britain, and this is precisely, it's being destroyed. Yeah. So there is so much contradiction. I mean, in my work at the university, I also had an awful lot of bright European students, an awful lot of talent. This is going to go away. So this global is again a misnomer. And I think that the United Kingdom really has a lot to offer to the common cause. And it has been a very good member state in terms of compliance, in terms of playing fair. Every time we were discussing the implementation of European Union law, in the statistics of the Commission, the United Kingdom had an excellent record. Once the law was there were less breaches by the United Kingdom. It was really, really a good partner. And this all is being squandered and thrown to the wind. And unfortunately, going back to this notion of the United Kingdom being a different, having a different national story, I think it's becoming very clear with hindsight that de Gaulle was someone who understood this very well. He was the first real Brexiter for very good reasons. He understood, and that's why twice rejected the UK application. So
Great.
it's a sad thing all around.
If the panel want to drink coffee juice.
Sorry.
Ooh.
Thank you. Still
Can I have
have
a
some.
coffee, please? Can I just address the lady's question about media while I've got the floor for my coffee
All
order?
right, I still have coffee.
I think you're right to raise the fact that we have faced a hostile media. There are some within the Labour Party who seem to think this is something new as of 18 months ago. That's rubbish. It's always been hostile to us. But there is a bit of a case of damned if we do, damned if we don't. Because actually when we did, as a Labour administration, get the backing of the Sun, whatever you think of that, it caused an outcry among many other lefties that we shouldn't even be having that, we shouldn't be engaging with it and so on. So it's kind of damned if we do go for that. And damned if we don't, because ultimately if you leave it to the media, they will write the story. And you're absolutely right that will be a hostile story on lots of things that we stand for. But I mean, to be honest, we realised this too late. The fact that the New European, as a paper, could spring up so quickly after Brexit, I'm afraid that's too late. We should have had that before. Or we should have, if we find that the establishment media or the MSM or whatever we want to call it, isn't saying what we want it to say, if it's not mediating for us, then we do something different. We don't complain about it. We don't get victim mentality. We should do something about it. And if that means creating a new paper, then for goodness sake, why did that happen on the 24th of June? We were, arguably 40 years too late on having a pro-European media story that we really should have all got behind. But talking of story, really, I think that question of story versus kind of academia and evidence and so on is a very interesting one that we still, I think, haven't quite got right. And on one of the areas that has led us to where we are now is the issue of immigration. Lots of times the left's response to there's so much immigration, my neighbours told me, the second, third, fourth hand stories about, the millionaire mansions going to the latest arrival from wherever, the kind of stereotypical stories and so on. Too often our response to that was, no, you're wrong. And we stopped it at that. And I'm afraid that's shown that didn't engage with the electorate on the whole. And so we need to find, dare I use the term third way? We need to find an argument that takes into account people's concerns, however much we think they are ignorant of evidence, or whether they don't take into account the evidence and the kind of the academic position and so on. We need to find a way of linking that, because otherwise we will just be kind of pushed back on that. And I think the point about flag, family and nation and so on is again one where the left has often said, well, we're not nationalistic, we're not going to go with that, actually we're internationalists and all that kind of thing. But again, on that, it seems that the country doesn't believe that we have spoken sufficiently for the nation that it votes us in to lead them. And so again, I think we need a new narrative on that, and maybe the stuff that Sarah's already referred to that John Denham is doing is important. I think one of the things we first of all have to tease out is, do you have to be a nationalist to be a patriot? And are those things the same? And so on. Actually,
no, I don't want to leave that hanging in the air. It's extremely important, and what is quite clear out of this, and I think one or two people mentioned it earlier, is that one evening, even with such an extraordinary amount of preparation that's gone into this, it's not enough. And so we're certainly going to invite our panellists to return and review this maybe in 6 months' time to actually see where these negotiations are going and to see if we've defined something of a purpose in this, because after all, it's not the distance we travel, it's the direction that we take that really matters in all of this. But for that comment that Darren just made regarding English democracy, you'll all be very, very happy to hear that there is a real continuity. We try to do this with the EC in terms of what happens on the second Tuesday next month, because John Denham is going to be coming to speak to us about English democracy. So really, it's not just to go into a sort of very high level as we have tonight with this great panel, but also we want to maintain that next month, and John has agreed to come and address this very issue to us. So please do come along and continue the debate in continuity. And if I was David Dimbleby, I would now say go to hashtag Southampton Fabians and continue the debate. But we are continuing the debate, and thanks to one of our EC members, Barney, tonight, we are recording this, and so it will be on the Southampton Fabians website, and you can review all of the things that have been said and the comments that have been made, and contribute to that further on the webpage from this evening. So please do that. It's a very valuable part of making sure that we globalise what we're doing. And we've got time maybe for just a couple more comments. Our friend here, please introduce yourself, has got something to say. Is there one other person? Please also then ask your question. And also Barney, and then we will round up this evening, and please stay and chat to each other and the panellists afterwards.
I just wanted to say a couple of things which I thought was really important. Our colleague over there, you were mentioning actually we should be prepared for an opportunity to change what's happening. And I think that's where the Labour Party particularly can have a major role in being prepared for what happens when the country, and I say when because I just do not believe that we are stupid enough as a nation to take this to its final conclusion. And it was interesting, Sarah, that you were talking about in history, particularly with the Roman Catholics. I mean, everything that's happened, or not everything, but some major issues that have happened in history, and I include very recent history, like June the 23rd, was based on lies. It was all based on lies. It happened with the Catholics, with the Roman Catholics, way back in the 14th century. Everything was based on a lie. And we are very... I think that the British are actually quite emotional. Some say, oh, they're very standoffish, and they are, because we're not. It's a bit like men don't eat quiche. you know, we're not allowed to. Men don't cry and that sort of thing. It's rubbish. You know, inside you're absolutely destroyed, but you'll maintain the British. You know, so it's just a face that we try to put on. We are affected, and we are affected emotionally, and that's what's happened over our Brexit. It's almost entire emotional. Everything has been emotional, and we've had these politicians who have been prepared and have done in many recent past to tell out-and-out lies to get their issue to the forefront. And the danger is that we continue to do the same thing. We've got to stop telling lies, and we've got to start actually dealing with the truth.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's been interesting looking at the sort of people and where Brexit's come from. Really. I've tried to understand them a bit and talk to a few people and things. And it's interesting. It seems to be two discrete groups, really, with almost contradictory views. Really, you have this group that I would associate with this reasonably well-off group in the sort of Telegraph reader and stuff like that. And really there's a group there that what they want is freedom from all these regulations to exploit people even more, really. They want to get rid of all that social legislation, get rid of all the Irish directives, get rid of all that there, and just have a completely freedom to sort of exploit people and make higher profits, the drive for this profits, really. And then you have this other group, which is an incredibly poor, well-off group, badly off group, in sort of society, mainly north of England, but also south of England, priced out of the housing market, rents going up, really poorly off, and they're sort of blaming people that's taken their jobs, nobody's looking after them. And actually the one group which is calling, ditch all the regulations and let's have higher profits, higher profits, and exploit people and everything else, are principally going to be exploiting this group. So I can't understand how that contradiction, as it goes on over time, and all this stuff, all this sort of lies begins to peel away, and they don't get the 350 million for NHS, and they don't get this here, how they're going to square that argument. But the other thing that's interesting, I think, is that really, this is happening across Europe, really, as well. It's quite interesting. I mean, the Pen nurse going for election, she's talking about 29% of the vote. That's what she's on, and it's a tight-run marginal vote, between her and Macron or something, or about 29% each. Maggie Thatcher was elected on about 36%. So in other words, she's not far off what you would get to be a really major party in like the House of Commons. If you took away proportional representation, she'd probably get elected in Britain as Prime Minister, or certainly be in a very close fighting chance of that, really. And in Germany, there's parties coming along which are anti-European, and Austria, so there's something going on across Europe. There's almost disenfranchised bit, but I think the people are even more disenfranchised in Britain, quite badly. You've got a whole block of the population which is getting quite badly up, and they're looking around for somebody to blame, really. And I think there's a reflection of that going across Europe. Talking about France, 25% youth unemployment. That sort of people are starting to blame, European and this sort of elite for exploiting.
Barney, nearly the last word.
Well, the referendum, I think, that struck me, I was quite involved in it, was that there were an awful lot of people that were very angry about being lied to in 1975. And they were very angry about a door being open to them. In 2016, a lot of people were lied to, and they were lied to about a door closing. So I suppose my question, I'm not sure we've got time to answer, is it prudent to set those lies straight? And second of all, is it prudent to try and whip up anger so that in 40 years' time we can rejoin the EU?
Well, in just a moment, I'm going to ask each of our tremendous and courageous panellists to give us a minute in answering that. Before I do so, Tom Moore, please, Tom, stand up. That's the man. Tom is our treasurer, and there are a couple of reasons why I'm asking Tom to stand up. One is that when we had an EC meeting and Tom suggested that we should do this event, I have to admit that I was sceptical that he could pull it off. But he has pulled it off, and so I would like to give particular thanks to all of our EC, but particularly to Tom, for doing a lot of the really hard groundwork and communicating that made it possible for us to have this event tonight. And also to Elliot, who held a meeting last week so that we could actually pull those strands together when I was up north. So really, I just had the pleasure, the enormous pleasure of being able to chair this tonight. But I really want to direct the thanks particularly to Tom for coming up with this brilliant idea and actually pulling it off. It's difficult enough to get one decent speaker every month. To have 4 on one night, and such a distinguished debating and questioning part of this, where we have more professors on this side of the aisle than we have here. So that's really extraordinary as well. And I've also just wanted to say regarding Tom that if we have some visitors on the way to becoming members of Fabians tonight, and you would like to help towards the cost of hiring this great space that we occupy on the second Tuesday every month, then give a couple of quid to Tom, because that's the kind of proportion that will help us to make sure that we've got some money in the kitty that we can go on being good European debaters. But if you would like to join Fabians, please do, because I think this is one of the ways that we can really celebrate what's best about politics on the left. That there's not any invective here. You can say anything, you can make your comments heard, and nobody is going to go for the jugular. We really want to have that broad level of evidence-based policy making, which Fabians is all about. And I'm so enormously grateful that we've done that at such a high level tonight. Each of our panellists has done an extraordinary job. You come here a little bit nervous when you don't quite know what's going to come back, but tonight it's been totally positive, totally practical, totally applicable, and we will go on building on that. So before we just call this part of our meeting tonight to a close, perhaps we could just go along the line and each of you could kind of give some response to what Barney just provocatively asked us to consider as we come to our benediction.
Well, I've got to go because I've got a babysitter to pay, so I'm just going to say one thing, which is basically we are living in a world, I believe, that belief trumps evidence. And, we have got to just get our heads around that politically. So though I applaud the attempt to be evidence-based in policy making and everything else, which I do agree with, we've got to engage with the gut, otherwise we ain't going to get anywhere. So that's all I want to say, really.
It's so many things. No monocausal explanations, I think. We should always, when we try and understand, try to understand why we got where we are, we need to take into account the various things, the lies, the orders, who voted demographically. We need, the emotions, emotive arguments, as well as social inequality, to understand where we are and where we are going. I don't think we should think that the left is dead, and there's of course we have nature's leading us down the path of reactionary politics now. For instance, in Germany now, Martin Schulz has been elected with 100%, and it looks quite good at the moment. I mean, it might all, probably Angela Merkel is going to do it again, but she's not a reactionary either, so, it's not that bad. And that is, after all, the biggest, population-wise, biggest country in the EU. And so, I think that's. Then I also think, this has been, in a sense, a revolution, the whole Brexit, throwing everything up in the air. But revolutions, often, when you look at the long-term issue, there's very rarely a real, complete breakup. and very often you revert to the equilibrium, that has been there before. And so I'm still thinking, given the institutional gravity of what had happened before for so many decades, we might just end up in a situation that does not look so different from what we had before, because it's propelling us forward what we had before. So that's I hope.
Well, I think that sometimes it is impossible to contend with irrationality, that you can't really break through, and this is, I think, a fact of life. I think that, yes, we have to continue to make the case based on evidence and rationality. And what saddens me enormously is that to come back to this equilibrium, we're going to be wasting so much resources, which are desperately needed in so many other areas. So this waste, this senseless waste, is what really, really saddens me. It is unnecessary, and it's just, as I keep saying, it's just to be where we are, to reinvent the wheel, to revert to where we were before. It's driven by this anxiety and emotiveness that, unfortunately, sometimes is how human beings are.
Yeah. It's a really interesting dichotomy, really, the evidence versus emotion. I'm up for owning both, actually, because I agree with what the gentleman said here. Actually, the British are emotional. It's just what they get emotional about. Rightly or wrongly, they get emotional about last night, the proms, flags, etc., whatever it might be, and made a point about not sneering at that, but kind of using the evidence of actually what else there is to get emotional about. And we on the left, I think, one of the many things that unites us, so we get emotional about inequality. We get emotional about the things that are wrong in society, rather than just tokens and symbols of what we are supposed to be about. So I think we should own both the evidence and say this is what's happening, but let's get emotional about that, and get emotional about the fact that the Tory government is not going to do anything pre-Brexit or post-Brexit about some of the things that I think we should be getting furious about. So is it prudent to whip up anger? Might not be prudent, but to quote a favourite European of mine, Machiavelli, it might be strategic. So actually, in 40 years, let's go for it. I'd say go hard or go home. Let's own both. Let's use the evidence that we have from what we know about society, what we believe about society, to make us passionate about changing that.
Well, tonight I think we've done something which also apparently happened 500 years ago. A German called Martin took 95 theses and he nailed them to the door of a church in Wittenberg. And as a result, there was a huge European debate. It ended up in the end of the Holy Roman Empire. Henry VIII deciding to have one of his daughters educated in one direction and the other one educated in the other direction, and so we had Elizabeth I that followed on to Elizabeth II, and history tells the story. So this kind of debate, 95 theses tonight, nailed to the beginning of a process that we are a part of, you're a part of. Tonight, I think this has been quite extraordinary. I think it certainly demands a verdict, and it demands that we consider this again in a while. I want to give enormous thanks to our distinguished panel, and also to our distinguished Fabians tonight, because I think we've done credit to a subject in the time that we had. Never has 2 hours flown by so quickly. I think there's probably still some tea and coffee, there might even be some grapes, and time to meet the panelists. So thank you all. And to come the same Tuesday, at the same time next month for John Denham, and let's give him a grilling and hold his feet to the fire and see whether really we should have a Celtic covenant and take Wales to the Irish Republic to stay in the European Union with Northern Ireland and Scotland and let England go on being as sovereign as it wants to be. So thank you.